Good evening, everybody. Happy October. So this video is a combination video of reading updates and tier ranking, thriller, horror, dark academia, mystery books. So you have recommendations for throughout the whole month of October. So for reading updates, the first book I wanted to talk about that I finished last month was Coraline by Neil Gaiman. For those of you who are unfamiliar, there is a movie that came out in 2013 that had its 10-year anniversary last year around Halloween time. And this is the movie about a little girl who is neglected by her parents, who gets transported into another world where she has different parents. And as somebody who is new to horror, this middle grade novel, I have to say, the illustrations in it are very frightening. Like this picture right here, for example, doesn't that look scary? So this book got 3.5 stars. The next book is a book that I borrowed from my mother-in-law. It is called Haunted Ground by Erin Hart. And the best thing that I like about this book is that it is set in Ireland. And I love the picturesque atmosphere of the Irish countryside. And of course, much like my in-laws, the characters in this book play the fiddle. So there's mention of fiddle music in here. This book got 4.5 stars. The next book is a 5-star rating for me. It is If We Were Villains by Emma Rio. Emma Rio came out with a new book at the end of last month, which was just a couple weeks ago, called The Graveyard Shift, which I'm excited to read. This book is set at a prestigious school for people who study Shakespeare, so that's the reason why I love it, because I love theater, and I love Shakespeare, specifically the plays Romeo and Juliet and As You Like It. So, yes, this book gets 5 stars and is in the simply the best section of my tier ranking list. Before I go on, I just wanted to thank Gabby Reeds for this tier ranking list that I got the outline for. The headings for the tiers are based on Schitt's Creek quotes. The next book I wanted to talk about is Macbeth by William Shakespeare. So this is a middle-of-the-road Shakespeare play for me. It's not good, it's not bad. It got 3.5 stars. The next book that I wanted to talk about is Never Lie by Frida McFadden. Frida McFadden just came out with a new release on Wednesday called The Boyfriend, which I'm so excited to read. This book and The Housemaid, which is on my bookcase, the twists just keep on twisting. The Housemaid is the first in a 3-book series, and I'm very excited to read the other 2. If you could leave a comment about The Housemaid's Secret and The Housemaid is watching, please let me know your opinions, because I'm excited about those. Okay, so for reading updates, the first book I wanted to talk about is We Spread by Ian Reid. The first book that I read by him a couple of months ago was I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which I'm thinking got really repetitive after a while, just because the main female protagonist in this book was like suicidal, and she was constantly talking about ending her life, which was very sad, but it just got repetitive that was the mindset she seemed to be in, and her significant other could not snap her out of it. I felt really sad for her. So right now in We Spread, I am on page 110. And the chapters in this book are not numbered, so I would not be able to tell you what chapter I'm on. The next book that I'm reading for thriller, horror, dark academia is Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. I just started this book day after getting it out of the library. Actually, I just got this out of the library today. I am already on page 80. And so far, what I really like about this book is the fact that there's mixed media involved in it, because interdispersed in between all of the chapters is podcast episode transcripts. And I'm really into that because, I don't know, would you guys consider my book review videos to be a podcast? I'm not really sure. I just call them, not really so much a podcast, but like a kind of like a one-on-one chat where I give you opinions on books I like to see if you will like them too. So I consider this to be sort of a live stream, because sometimes I will live stream these book review videos, but most of the time I pre-record them to post them later on. So I can't give this book a rating yet because I'm not very far into it, but if I could give it a rating right now, I would probably give it 4 stars. But I just started it, so I don't know. So this next book is Reese's Book Club YA pick for October. And what I really like the best about it is that it has indigenous voices in it. It's a Native American centered mystery that takes place on the Blackfoot Reservation. And I'm really enjoying learning about this Native American tribe, because I don't really know much about them. So I just started this book on Wednesday, and I am on page 276, chapter 34. So this book got 5 stars, and in my tier ranking that I'm going to get into in a minute, it is in the Simply the Best category. Now into the tier ranking list. So this tier ranking is cumulative and is based on all of the horror, thriller, dark academia, mystery books that I have read since the beginning of the year. So it is a accumulation of 9 months worth of reading. So there's a lot of books to talk about here, and this could go on for a little bit. So if there's a specific book that you like, that you want to skip ahead to hear the review of, please just skip ahead to that book, because it might take a while for me to get to it. So for Simply the Best, as I just said, Looking for Smoke is a 5-star read. The other 5-star reads include And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, which I have mentioned before because I reviewed it in my TBR for books that were on TV, because this book was featured in Haley Tham's Reading Like Rory Gilmore for a Week video. And I saw the play about 9 years ago when the Amato Center did it, and my friends Sophie and Kevin played Vera Claythorne and Mr. Lombard. The next book that I wanted to talk about is Dial A for Aunties. This book is a cozy mystery that is part of a 3-part, the first book in a 3-part series, which is by Jessie Q. Sutanto. And the family unit in this book reminds me of May's family in Turning Red, because it is a young girl who's like a teenager, young adult, and her 4 aunts and her mother solving a mystery. So what happens in this book is that we have our protagonist, Meddy, like her middle name, her name is Madeline, or Madeline or something. And so she's about to get married, but her fiance turns up dead, and they are tasked with hiding the body, and it gets to be confusing because they have to like find a way to get the dead body into the hotel room without looking too conspicuous. So that was the part that other booktubers have mentioned they don't like about this book. They don't like the fact that that could not be done so conspicuously. But this book is really funny, and as I just said, the book was funny, and I really liked the family dynamic between the main character and her aunties. The next book, so right now I am almost done with rereading the Harry Potter series, and I still need to read books 6 and 7, so I'm going to rank in this ranking list the first 5 books plus Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. And then once I reread the other 2 books, they will be added into the tier list later on. So Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, books 1 and 3, and book 8, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, are in this tier. Harry Potter and the Cursed Child is the play script for the play that was on Broadway about 5 or 10 years ago, which I never got to see, so I'm really glad that the library has the play script of the play available, because I always wondered what happened to all of the characters at the end of Harry Potter. And Harry Potter and the Cursed Child is basically the Harry Potter characters as adults, and they all have kids, so it's like the next generation of Hogwarts, witchcraft and wizardry. And I really enjoyed it. The next book in this tier ranking list after If We Were Villains, which I just talked about a few minutes ago, is In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. I read In My Dreams I Hold a Knife in March, I believe, and I have to say I was on the edge of my seat the whole time reading this book and trying to figure out the mystery. I could not stand the main female character in this book. She just was really whiny, and I didn't really like her. So in this book, it's a thriller book that is set at a 10-year college reunion, and one of their classmates has died. She was murdered, and they're trying to figure out who murdered her. So that's the whole premise of the book, and I don't want to spoil it in case you want to read it, and you should. The next book in this tier ranking list after Looking for Smoke is Lungfish by Megan Gillis. I read this a couple of months ago, and it is a horror book that is a series of short stories that are set in Maine, where I'm from, and it's a bunch of like short stories that are set in nature about a single mom raising her daughter, and it was very good. I don't want to spoil anything about what happens because you should definitely read it. The next book I wanted to talk about is Mexican Gothic. Actually, I want to talk about all the books by Silvia Moreno Garcia all at once. Mexican Gothic and Silver Nitrate are in this tier listing, and then The Seventh Veil of Solomon, her latest release from last month, which came out on August 6th, is in the next tier. I love that journey for me. What I love the most about Sylvia Moreno Garcia's writing is that all of her books are centered around Mexican culture. Mexican Gothic is set in the 1950s, and it's about a girl who is asked to go back to her family's house in Mexico to help her cousin through a difficult time. And I really learned a lot about Mexican history. Silver Nitrate is set in 1993 and is about a Mexican sound designer of Mexican horror movies. And as somebody who is recently new to reading horror genre books, this book was very engaging. The mystery had me on the edge of my seat the whole entire time, and I just loved the Mexican setting. And the Seventh Veil of Solomon, Sylvia Moreno Garcia's latest release, is set in 1950s Hollywood, and it's about an up-and-coming actress in Mexico who is in a big movie, and she's an actor in the ensemble, but she's vying for a really bigger role, and she's in competition with somebody who has been in the business for a longer time. It was a really good book, and it makes me think of The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and basically this main character reminds me of like a Mexican version of Elizabeth Taylor. The next book I wanted to talk about is Misery by Stephen King. The reason why I rank this so highly is because it's about a writer. And I have been on a kick of reading books about writers, books that are set in bookstores, like The Story Life of A.J. Fickery. Misery is about a writer named Paul who gets in a car accident on a snowy night because the roads are really icy, and he is taken in and sort of kidnapped by his biggest fan, Annie Wilkes, who in the film version of this book is played by the great Kathy Bates, who was also in the Annie movie with Victor Garber and Audrey McDonald that came out in 1997. So I haven't seen the movie, but I really want to see it. And I really like the atmosphere and the fact that it's about a writer. The next book I wanted to talk about is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. The description on the back of this book says that this book combines aesthetics from The Exorcist and beaches, which I think makes perfect sense for a description because it's about a young teenage girl who gets possessed, and her best friend has to help the demon get exorcised from her body, and it takes place in the summertime on the beach or on the lake. So I talked about Never Lie. The next book is Night of the Living Rez. I got this book last year when I went to an award ceremony that my mom had for her children's book, Fighting for Yes, the biography of Judy Heumann. The Night of the Living Rez is written by an Indigenous author that is from Portland. His name is Morgan Talty. And this is a series of short stories about growing up in the Abenaki tribe, which is the tribe that is mostly associated with southern Maine, where I'm from. And I really like this book because, again, I don't know much about Indigenous people, and this book was really educational for me. And his writing is also very engaging and descriptive. The next book I wanted to talk about is The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This is my first book by Lucy Foley, and I can't wait to read more of her books. It is set in Scotland, and it's set at, basically it's a murder mystery that's set at a wedding, and the bride ends up dead, or the maid of honor, somebody ends up dead. Kind of like in The Perfect Couple by Elin Hildenbrand. And then the other people in this situation are tasked with figuring out who the murderer is. And this book kept me guessing the whole entire time, and it was very engaging, and like it was very atmospheric with the spooky setting of the Scottish mansion. The next book is The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. I just mentioned this a little bit ago when I was talking about Never Lie. The next book is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. Again, I love the atmosphere of this book and the fact that it's set on a lake. This was actually 4.5 stars, but I'm rounding the rating up to 5 because of the atmosphere, the mystery, and the fact that it's about an actress. And the actress is sort of involved in the murder mystery because she's blamed for the murder, even though it's not really her fault. But the thing I didn't like about this book is, we are following a story of an actress who is a theater actress, and she's an alcoholic. And the thing that really bothers me is that nobody else in her acting company has any cognitive awareness that she is a raging alcoholic who needs help. They just leave her like blacked out in the middle of the road after a show when a fan tries to attack her, and don't even think to see that she's okay. And also, she comes to rehearsal drunk quite a bit, and I feel like the producers of the play should have called her out on that behavior. When I read this book, I immediately thought about what Matthew Perry said in his book about how when he was dealing with his alcoholism on a set of Friends, he had to be driven to the set by a sober technician, which was basically kind of like a chaperone to make sure he didn't drink on the set. And that's what I think this character in this book needed, was a sober technician. The next book is a recent read that I just read last week called The House That Horror Built by Christina Henry. This is my first book by Christina Henry. Gabby Reeds talked about it on her channel. She didn't give it a great review. I think she gave it 2 stars. But Jordaline read it for her book club last month, and I'm pretty sure that she gave it 5 stars. So reviews about this book are obviously mixed, but I liked it. So this book follows the story of a single mother and she gets a job working for a esteemed director of horror movies. And the thing I liked the best about this book was the atmospheric setup of the house, because this guy is a director of movies, so there are props and costumes all over this house. And basically, this woman who is our main character, she has a 12-year-old son who has ADHD, and she's single mother, and she gets the job because she needs an extra job for income to help raise her son. So she's essentially a maid at this fancy mansion for this rich movie director. So she's in charge of like cleaning the house and dusting all the props and making sure all the costumes still look in good shape. But as she goes along in her job, she realizes that she hears voices in the wall, and that the voice is haunted. Very creepy. So I don't want to give any spoilers in case you want to read this. So, and I highly recommend you do, because it was one of the main horror books recently that I gave 5 stars to. The final book in this section of the tier list is The Hypnotist Love Story by Leanne Moriarty, who wrote 9 Perfect Strangers and Apples Never Fall. 9 Perfect Strangers is going to be mentioned in the next section of the tier list, so I'll get to that in a bit. So basically, this story talks about a hypnotist who falls in love with her patient, who is being stalked by his ex-wife. And I loved the romantic buildup between Ellen and Patrick. Ellen is the lady who's the hypnotist, and Patrick is the guy who's her patient, who she falls in love with. I can't remember the name of the character who plays the ex-wife who's stalking Patrick, but I think it's interesting because she was also a patient of Ellen's at one point before she got divorced from Patrick, so it's so insane. It's a crazy book. There were twists and turns in this situation at every turn, and Patrick's son Jack is also a really good character. He's really very sweet. And all of the books I've read this year that have characters in them that are children, Jack is one of my favorites. Danny Torrance from The Shining is one of my favorites. The 2 kids in Wild Eyes by Elsie Silver, which I'm in the middle of right now, adorable. Emmy and Ollie. And then Ruby from Bright Falls series by Ashley Herring Blake, and Waylay from the Knock 'Em Out series by Lucy Score. All phenomenally written children in romance and thriller and horror books. The next 2 Stephen King books I wanted to talk about in the next section of the tier list, I Love This Journey for Me, is Billy Summers and Fairy Tale. I read Billy Summers in February, and it is a crime book about a person who is trying to catch somebody who escaped from prison. And again, this book was full of great plot twists and kept me on the edge of my seat. And I highly recommend it. This is a crime book. It's not really thriller or horror, but still, it's by Stephen King, and I loved it, so I figured I would talk about it. The next book I wanted to talk about is Fairy Tale. This book focuses on a 17-year-old boy named Charlie who takes care of his elderly neighbor named Mr. Bodwitch, and he is basically transported into a fantasy world full of fairy tale characters. I'm actually rereading this book right now, and I don't want to get too far into talking about it. But I just wanted to let you guys know ahead of time where this falls in my ranking. I am going to review it in a later video once I finish rereading it and give it a solo review so I can go into details about what I liked specifically about this character and his relationships with his dad and his neighbor, Mr. Bodwitch. So stay tuned for that review. That will be out later on in the month. The next book is the second book in the Aunties trilogy, Four Aunties and a Wedding. Again, I liked the build-up. I liked how this builds off this first book. But by this time, Madeline is working on getting her own marriage together, and I feel like if I were the fiance of her, I would really not like how intrusive the aunts are. They're funny in some ways, but in other ways it can get pretty annoying. The next book is... The next two Harry Potter books that are in this tier ranking are Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets and Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I think I'm going to do a separate video where I talk about the Harry Potter series and break down what I like about each of the books. So that video will also be coming out once I read books 6 and 7, so stay tuned for that as well. The next book is Kill for Me, Kill for You by Steve Kavanaugh. And this is basically about two women who meet on a train and they basically make a pact with each other to kill their husbands. Very good, very entertaining. I really enjoyed it. The next book I wanted to talk about is 9 Perfect Strangers by Leanne Moriarty. I really liked the relationship build-up between all of the characters in this book, and it really kept the plot interesting. Like, sometimes books with too many POVs can really overwhelm me, like Bad Summer People or The Astrology House, and I'm going to talk about The Astrology House in a little while when I get to the last section of the tier list with the DNFs. The next book is a book I am currently reading right now called Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout. I was recently gifted this book by my mother-in-law, Sally. So far, I am really enjoying it and enjoying how the plot has twists and turns. I am going to review this in my monthly wrap-up video because I am not done with it yet and I don't want to provide spoilers. The next book I wanted to talk about is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. This is a magical realism book about a ghostwriter for romance novels who falls in love with the ghost of an author she has written about. I mean, it's really creative. Ashley Poston's writing is really engaging. I liked this book much better than The 7-Year Slip because I found the plot to be a lot more engaging, and I will get into my thoughts on The 7-Year Slip in just a minute, because that's in the next level down in the tier ranking. The next book I wanted to talk about is The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. So, this book is pretty self-explanatory. It's about a therapy group for final girls in horror movies. Basically, imagine the female protagonist in horror movies like Scream, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, The Shining, people like that. All those final girls. Well, actually, I don't know if The Shining is a good one to use as an example because that character is a much older woman. She would probably be much older than a lot of the other final girls. So basically this is about a therapy group for final girls in horror movies, and basically they talk in therapy about how their trauma is being used for profit to make big movie sales and get lots of merchandise made, which actually, to be honest, I like that idea for a premise of a horror book, and I think it's very creative and bold for Grady Hendrix to do that. As somebody who has recently gotten into reading horror books and watching horror movies, I think I'm too scared to watch a lot of horror movies, mostly because of the blood. But with Scream, I thought that movie was really campy, and it was really meant to be a parody of horror movies, and I mostly watched it because of Courtney Cox, I'm not gonna lie. And she was actually not really my favorite character in that movie. The main protagonist in that movie is Sidney Prescott, who is played by Neve Campbell, and she was great. And Drew Barrymore, I think it was her. Yeah, Drew Barrymore was Neve Campbell's best friend, and she was also very good. So I haven't seen any of the other Scream movies yet because I don't know if they're going to continue to get more gory. But I know that the Scream 7 movie is coming out in a couple of years, so I feel like I have time to watch the rest of this franchise if I so choose to. Hopefully I can build up my energy reserves. Because, I mean, I liked Scream. It was kind of easy to guess who the killer was because it was given away at the beginning of the movie. You could tell that it was Billy Loomis because he gets in trouble with the principal. Him and his other friend get in trouble with the principal, and the principal tells them to stop doing the pranks, but he doesn't listen, obviously. And he is honestly not a good boyfriend for Sydney. I don't understand why Sydney stays with him at all, because he's a jerk, and he's also narcissistic. So, for a movie review, Scream gets a B-, by the way. The Final Girl Support Group got 4.5 stars on Goodreads for me. What is next? The next book is The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. The reason why I haven't started to reread this book yet is because it's long. It took me over a month to finish this book when I read it last year. It's good. The writing is fantastic. It's very atmospheric because it's set in Romania, because it's a retelling of Dracula, and it's about a lady who is doing a research paper about the history of the Dracula book. So that's what I really liked about it, the atmosphere of Romania and the detailed research she does about the history of Dracula. But this book is over 700 pages, and it took me a month to finish. So I'm getting through the rest of my TBR for this month before I can tackle The Historian and the last 2 Harry Potter books. So I won't be getting to those books until November. The next book I wanted to talk about is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. I read this book last month, and it is so cute. It's about a guy named Linus who works for Department of Health and Human Services for magical children. Basically, that's essentially what his job is. So he is tasked to go to an orphanage for magical children to check on the well-being of the kids, kind of like an Annie with the orphanage with Miss Hannigan, although I feel like this orphanage is run much better than the orphanage in Annie. And my favorite magical child in this book, her character name is Zoe, and all of the little kids in this book were cute. They were like, I would imagine they were like 7 or 8 years old, so they're like obviously younger than the kids in Harry Potter, because the kids in Harry Potter are like in middle school and high school. Because I think at the beginning of the Harry Potter series, Harry Potter is like 11 or 12, if I'm not mistaken. The next book is a book I just reviewed in a previous video. It's called The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chomsky. This is about a girl who is getting married, but she is then sent back to her old hometown to take care of her aunt who is about to die. And while she is caring for her ailing relative, she is faced to face her past. And this guy who's gonna marry her is not sure what he's getting himself into, and I don't want to spoil it, so please read this book. I actually was recommended this book by Sarah Without an H, because she talked about it last year in her top 23 books of 2023 video. So shout out to Sarah for recommending this book to me. I loved it. The next book is The Only One Left by Riley Sager. So I feel like Riley Sager got inspiration for this book from the Lizzie Borden case from the 19th or 20th century. Because essentially, what we have here is a lady, a young woman who works for kind of elder care services, and she got fired from her last job for mixing up drugs for her patient or something. So she's given a second chance to work with this lady, Lenora Hope, who is said to have killed her entire family when she was 17 years old. And the reason why I say this book reminds me of the Lizzie Borden case is basically Lizzie Borden, like there's a theory behind her that she killed her mother and her stepfather with an axe. And this is what Lenora Hope in this book is said to have done. And in present day, Kit, who is the main character, is set to take care of Lenora Hope. And she is bedridden and she cannot verbally speak, so she uses like a typewriter to communicate. And basically, I hate to spoil this, but the big twist in this book is she admits to Kit that she did in fact kill her family. So I loved the setting of this book. Is set like in a big spooky house overlooking the river or the lake or the ocean. I think it's supposed to be set in North Carolina, but I'm not really sure. But I just love the atmosphere of it. I love how it's inspired by the Lizzie Borden case too. I mean, the next book I wanted to talk about is another Stephen King book. It's called The Outsider. It's a mystery book that is set in the present day, and I don't want to spoil the mystery too much in case you want to read it. But this is another Stephen King book I highly recommend that you check out because it's not horror like the rest of his books are. It's mystery. And the plot of the mystery is very engaging. And one of the main detectives in this book is the main character in Stephen King's most recent release, Holly, which I will get into my rating of in a little while. The next book I wanted to talk about is The Shadow Cabinet by Juno Dawson. This is the sequel to Her Majesty's Royal Coven that came out at the beginning of August. I'm sorry for all the coughing. My allergies are really acting up today. And what I like the best about this book is one of the witches in this book, Lenore. She travels around the world, and there's a lot of good atmospheric setup for like other countries like Italy and Romania and Germany. So that was my favorite part of this whole book. Her Majesty's Royal Coven, on the other hand, I read this book twice. I DNF'd it both times because I thought it was too political. And I could definitely tell that there were references to how J.K. Rowling is very transphobic. And that's why I chose to DNF it. The next book I wanted to talk about is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. Basically, this book is The House in the Cerulean Sea, but instead of magical children, it's about a witch who goes to an orphanage for witches who are trying to learn about magic, to teach them about magic. And it's really cute and really sweet, and I love the relationships in it. I read this book back in January, so I really need to read it again because I can't remember much about it because I read it such a long time ago. The next book I wanted to talk about was a 4-star read. It's a sci-fi fantasy book. The world gives way, and it's set in outer space, and I really loved the setting of outer space. I thought that was really cool, and the writing of this book was very engaging. I was kept on the edge of my seat the whole time. This was another recommendation from Sarah without an H that I'm really appreciative of. The final book in this tier ranking, in this part of the tier ranking list, is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, which I just finished today. So this book is set in a spooky house. It's very reminiscent of the Addams Family, and my favorite thing about the Addams Family is the dynamic between the characters. There are the main character's girl, her name is Catherine, and her sister's name is Madeline, and then she has an uncle Julian, and I didn't quite catch the names of her parents, but basically each character in this book reminds me of one of the characters from the Addams Family. And the writing in this book was great. The plot was engaging. The setting was excellent. The next section of the tier ranking is Kind's Wishes, Warmest Regards. I wanted to talk about a novel love story by Ashley Poston. Next, this book is a magical realism book about a bookstore author who gets transported into the world of the romance books that she writes, and it's really cute. I mean, the plot can be predictable in some places, but I still gave it 3.5 to 4 stars. It's not as... It's right in the middle between the Dead Romantics and the 7-Year Slip in terms of star rating. Dead Romantics, 4 stars. A Novel Love Story, 3.75, sorry. And then The 7-Year Slip, 3.5. I'll talk about the 7-Year Slip next so I can get all of the Ashley Poston books out of the way. When Sarah without an H made her top worst books of 2023 video at the end of last year, her main complaint about the 7-Year Slip was the fact that the relationship between our two romantic leads, Clementine and Ewan, was not believable, and that they lacked chemistry and connection, and I agree with her completely. And that's all I'm going to say about that book. I've already reviewed it before anyway. The next book I wanted to talk about is Arsenic and Adobo. This is a mystery book about a girl who is down on her luck, so she goes back to her hometown and works at her aunt's restaurant. And her ex-boyfriend is a food critic, and she is accused of poisoning his dessert. So that's what the mystery is based of, and she's trying to clear her name for being accused of killing her ex-boyfriend. And we have also made a recipe in this book. I think it was for soup. We made it back in the early part of the summer, back in like mid-May, early June, and it was delicious. So the book got 2.5 to 3 stars. The recipe got like 6.5 out of 10 ranking. The next book I wanted to talk about is Carrie by Stephen King. You can tell this was his first book because the writing was disjointed in certain places. Carrie was a likable and relatable female protagonist. I was able to relate to her because she's 16 years old and she's bullied by her classmates. And I was bullied as a teenager too. What makes things worse for her, unfortunately, is that she's also abused by her mother. So she has a shitty situation all around. And she has telekinetic powers like Matilda does, which is pretty interesting. The thing that I didn't like about this book was that, like, the mother shamed her for having her period, which was so stupid and weird because that's not something you would normally shame. She was, like, overly religious, and she thought that, like, she basically thought that menstruation was something that was brought on by the devil. And I mean, you can tell this book was written by a guy because it is also very too focused. Like, he's really into talking about the period blood a lot, and it's gross, and that really turned me off. So, Carrie got 3 stars from me. The next book I wanted to talk about is Finley Donovan is Killing It. So this book got 3.5 stars. It is a thriller that is not very thrilling. The plots aren't very twisty. It's basically about this writer named Finley Donovan who is meeting with her agent at Panera Bread for talking about her next thriller book that she wants to write. The woman in the next booth overhears her, and she misunderstands what she's talking about and thinks that she's actually a hit woman, and she hires her to kill her husband. But Finlay is a horrible person who is hired to kill somebody because she's just not good at it at all. So I gave that book 3 stars. The next book is Haunted Ground. I talked about that. I'm going to review Harry Potter books later. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix is the next. After that is I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which I talked about when I talked about We Spread. Next book is Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. This book got 3 stars for me. The thing that I did not like about it was that I didn't think that the main lead of this book was very well written. She was not very smart or very she was clueless, basically. She wasn't really too aware of what was happening. And she was really, basically, I was able to figure out the mystery before she was able to, which I don't think is very good for somebody in a thriller book. The next book is Midnight Sun. Midnight Sun is basically the Twilight series from Edward Cullen's perspective. The reason why I rank this higher than any other book in the Twilight series is because in this book, Edward's family is really explored more, and his family is made to be a lot more likable than they are in the Twilight books. My favorite characters out of everybody in Edward Cullen's family are Esme and Alice, his mom and his sister. I might as well talk about Twilight while I'm here because, so the Twilight books, I first read them when they first came out in the mid-2000s. I was more of a Harry Potter person. because I grew up with Harry Potter. The Twilight craze started when I was in my late 20s, when I was graduating from college, mid-20s. Sorry, I was 22 when Twilight started, and now I'm 39. I hate to talk about my age in these videos, I'm sorry, but, what can I say? I'm a hopeless romantic. That's my downfall. When I first read the Twilight books, I thought that, the romance between Bella and Edward was adorable, but I recently read the first Twilight book back in April, and I have to say, Edward is a creepy stalker. Bella is a moron for falling in love with somebody who could easily rape her. Yeah, so I'm not going to reread the rest of the Twilight series. I just cannot get behind how creepy Edward is. I mean, I always was hoping she would end up with Jacob, and I was sad that she didn't. When I first read the series and watched the movies, I am not going to rewatch the rest of the movies either. Yeah, I can't get behind that. Where are we? The next book I wanted to talk about is None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This is a book that is similar to Listen for the Lie because it's about two women who meet in the bathroom at a restaurant where they're celebrating their birthdays at. One girl's name is Alex and one girl's name is Josie. Alex has a true crime podcast on the radio. And like Listen for the Lie, this book interdisperses transcripts from the podcast into the narrative of the book, which I think is really cool. I managed to get through this book twice, but I have to say the mystery aspect of this book is too predictable, and I don't think I'm going to be reading this again. The next book is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is basically about a teenage girl who falls in love with somebody who's much older than her, and it's about a very spooky haunted house that she goes to live in. I thought the romance in this book was good. This is a classic book that came out in the 1950s, I think, and the atmosphere of the spooky house is good. I just didn't like the relationship dynamic between these two characters. It was not believable. But the writing of this book was very good and very engaging. The next book is the third book in the Aunties trilogy. The next book is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This was a mystery book that is set in a haunted house. It is another classic book by Shirley Jackson. I liked this book. It was very engaging. The plot turns were very... actually, no, I don't know. The mystery was hard for me to solve, and I had trouble staying engaged in the plot, but the setting was very atmospheric. I'll give it that. I gave The Haunting of Hill House 3 stars. The next book is The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. Other people who have reviewed this book have said it reminds them of the movie Knives Out. I couldn't really see where they formulated that opinion from. I mean, I think I should give this book a second chance because I only got 150 pages into it before stopping. But I think I need to read it again, and then maybe I might change my mind. So for right now, this book is in kind wishes, warmest regards, but if I reread it again, I think my opinion of it will change. So we will have to see. The next book is The Perfect Marriage by Geneva Rose. I read this book in February, and I have to say, I like Geneva Rose's writing. I did not like the guy in this book. He was too whiny and pretentious, and if I were the lady in this book who it was hired for her case, so basically what happens is the guy cheats on his wife, and he ends up, his mistress ends up dead, and he ends up being accused of her murder. The ex-wife ends up taking on the case as the attorney, and if I were her, I would not have done that. That was a stupid thing for her to do, because she obviously had bias because this guy was her ex-husband. So I will never read another book by Geneva Rose again, because I just didn't really like this book. The next book is The Unfortunate Side Effects of... The Shining. So, The Shining by Stephen King. I read this book in February. It's a good book to read when it's winter because it's set at a snowy, abandoned hotel that is supposedly supposed to be in Maine, because Stephen King is from Maine. So, this is centered around the Torrance family, Jack, Wendy, and 8-year-old Danny. In the movie, Jack Torrance is played by Stephen King, and it's played by, he's not played by Stephen King, I'm sorry, he's played by Jack Nicholson. And Jack Nicholson, from what I have heard, I haven't seen this movie, but I've heard that The Shining is probably one of his best performances from other people who have... I'm not sure who I have heard talk about this movie, but I feel like when this movie came out, it won a lot of Academy Awards, and Jack Nicholson won the award for playing Jack Torrance. So, as I was saying earlier, Danny Torrance, the 8-year-old son of Wendy and Jack, is one of my favorite child characters in the book, and he should be protected at all costs because he was so cute. But I hated Jack because he was abusive and he was really mean to his wife and his son. And I wanted Wendy to take Danny away from him, but that did not happen. The next book is The Unfortunate Side Effects of Heartbreak and Magic. I recently reread this book a couple of weeks ago. I originally read it back in probably February or March. And again, this is about witches and magic, and it's about witches who cast spells to take illnesses away from people, and the writing is good, the characters are engaging. I gave this book 3.5 stars because there are certain aspects of this that didn't seem completely believable to me, but I mean, it's supposed to be fantasy, so I guess not everything is supposed to be believable in a fantasy book, but in certain situations, I have to take things for what they are when it comes to, like, casting spells and trying to cure people of illnesses, because that's what the spells in this book were supposed to do, and I'm not sure how effective the spells actually were. The final book in this section of the tier ranking is They Never Learn by Lynn Fargo. I read this book at the end of August, and it's about a college professor who has a side hustle as a person who tracks down serial killers and kills them for committing their crimes. And, I mean, for one thing, I enjoyed this book. I thought the premise was really interesting. I didn't really think the side hustle job of working as somebody who kills serial killers was very believable of a job for somebody to have, but I guess for a situation like this, it works. Like a vigilante for justice of women who are killed or raped or whatever, but yeah, I gave this book 3.5 to 4 stars just because the plot was engaging, but as I just said, the job of this main character didn't seem very believable to me. The final section of this tier list is Ew David, which is basically summarized as thrillers that were not thrilling, or DNFs. So these are books that I couldn't get into because I thought the plots were too predictable, or I just couldn't get into the plots at all because I thought they were boring or too slow. The first 2 books I wanted to talk about are similar in plot. They are dark romances about student-teacher relationships and grooming. The first book is called Gothicana, and the relationship between the student and teacher in this book just did not seem believable at all. And I just couldn't get into it. I stopped reading this book at page 190 with My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Marshall, or whatever her name is. I don't have the name of the author in front of me right now, but so this book is about a girl who is in her 30s, and she is in therapy for a incident that happened when she was a teenager because she was lonely she was a new student at a prestigious boarding school in New England, and basically she was groomed by her 45-year-old high school teacher. And I couldn't get into this book because I thought the relationship dynamic was really gross. It made me think of the episode of Boy Meets World where Topanga was hit on by her teacher, because that's essentially what this teacher does to this 16-year-old girl. Although in Boy Meets World, Topanga was in college. But you have to admit, the behavior of her college professor in that episode was so gross, and it's very I'm just saying that teachers that act like that should not be in education, because it's disgusting that there are actually people out there who would do something like that. Another character that's very similar in nature to this guy in My Dark Vanessa and the teacher in Gothicana and the character in Boy Meets World is Ezra from Pretty Little Liars, because he basically grooms his student Aria to be his girlfriend. And it's gross because, I mean, I've never seen this show. A lot of my younger cousins have seen it. But basically from what I've heard from them and from other people I know who have watched it, they have said that Ezra's relationship with Arya is gross, and based on what I have seen in these 2 books and what I remember from the Boy Meets World episode about Topanga being hit on by her professor, I can see where they are coming from. I can see where they come from with their opinions. The next book is Holly by Stephen King. As I said, the main female protagonist in this book is one of the detectives in the previous Stephen King book I mentioned, The Outsider. And the thing that I do not like about this book is that it is set during COVID-19, and I think that does the book a disservice because it hits too close to home for people like me who don't really want to read books about recent events. And also, something that I don't specifically like about the writing in this book and the writing in his other book, The Institute, is that you can tell that he is left-leaning and Republican because his political views really I'm talking about the author Stephen King. I love his writing, but in these two books, Holly and Institute, you can tell that his political opinions really show through in his writing. Especially in Holly, because it's about COVID-19 and the pandemic. The next book is House of Hunger. Jordaline gave this book 4 stars on her channel. I gave it 2.5 to 3. I just didn't find the relationship between the two main female. So this is a lesbian romance about a vampire who falls in love with another vampire, and the relationship just didn't seem very believable. The next book is Mary by Nat Cassidy. This is about a 50-year-old woman who loses her job and is menopausal, but her doctor basically gives her, there's an episode of The Golden Girls where Dorothy is having some serious medical issues, and the doctor kind of dismisses her and says, oh, it's only because you're getting older. And that's what this doctor does in Mary. And then after that, Mary loses her job at the bookstore because her manager wants the bookstore to hire younger people, and she's obviously 50. So she goes home to her old hometown to care for her aging relative, much like in The Last Tale of the Flower Bride. I had to stop reading this book at page 190 because there is a section about animal abuse and killing a dog, and I don't like stuff like that. So after I got past that point, I stopped reading it. The next book is Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead. This book is by the same author as In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. And Twilight is mentioned on every second page because the main female character in this book is obsessed with Twilight and vampires. And I had to stop reading this book after chapter 6 because I was getting really sick of how often Twilight was being mentioned. And as you can tell by what I just said about Twilight, I'm not really a big fan of Twilight as much as I was when the books first came out. The next book in this section of the tier ranking is My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a recent book that I just got out of the library on Tuesday. I only got about 135 pages in before stopping. The pacing of this book was very slow, and the only thing that I liked about it were the essays in between the chapters, because this girl is about a high school girl named... This book is basically about a high school girl named Jade who is taking a class in her school about analyzing horror movies. And basically, there are essays in between the chapters that she is writing about the final girls in horror movies. Like, final girls, like Scream, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street. Books like that I mentioned when I was talking about Final Girls and the Final Girls support group. The essays were the only thing about this book that I found engaging. I was just bored, so I had to stop reading it. And I know this is one of Riley Marie's really favorite books, but I just couldn't get into it. I'm sorry, Riley. The next book I want to talk about is One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus. This is a YA thriller book that is basically a teen version of Breakfast Club. It's like a modernized version of Breakfast Club, but like instead of in the Breakfast Club, all of the 5 main protagonists are different teenage tropes, like not tropes, what's the word? I don't remember what the description is. I can't remember. But, my stereotypes. Teen stereotypes. Jock, nerd, pretty girl, basket case, and, druggie. So, one of the characters dies in detention, and basically all of the other students that he's with are charged in his murder. And the reason why I stopped reading this book was because the plot got too predictable midway through, and I was pretty much able to guess who the killer was. And basically, the reason why this character dies in the first place is because he has a blog on Tumblr where he talks about the gossip in his school. And he is basically leaking information that's really private about the 2 other classmates that he's in detention with. And once I got to the point of figuring out which 2 characters in this book were a romantic couple, I was easily able to figure out who the killer was. And again, I'm not offering spoilers. Not that many people who I'm friends with would want to read a YA murder mystery book, but in case you want to, I don't want to spoil it. And plus, One of Us is Lying is also a show on Netflix. So that's why I also don't want to spoil who the killer is in case you want to watch the show. Oh, another book I forgot to list in this tier ranking, and I apologize for leaving it out, is The Reappearance of Rachel Price. This was a new release from back in April, and I actually really enjoyed it. I forgot to rank this one, and I apologize for that. If I were to list it here, I would have probably listed it, and I love that journey for me because I just love the plot twist in this book, and it was very shocking to find what the reveal was of what happened to Rachel Price. The next book I wanted to talk about is Pretty Baby by Mary Kubica. This was another book that I had on my TBR of books that were recommended by Riley Marie and Sarah without an H, and I stopped this because it was boring, and I just couldn't. The plot wasn't very twisty, so that's why I had to stop. The next book is Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. Again, this book is very atmospheric, but that to me, that was the only thing that it had going for it. I didn't like any of the characters. I thought they were too whiny. I mean, the writing was engaging, and I loved the atmosphere, but that was about it. So I DNF'd this book at 50%. The next book is a book I actually recently just DNF'd, The Astrology House by Karen Jade. Gabby Rees read this So I recently subscribed to her channel 2 or 3 weeks ago, and that's where I got most of my recommendations for this tier list and also the setup for the tier list. So thank you, Gabby, for all of this. So I picked up this book for the sole reason that Gabby mentioned in her review that there was a reference to Friends in it. But I got 200 pages into this book, and I couldn't figure out what the reference to Friends was supposed to be. Not that that had anything to do with the mystery, but it would have been really nice for context to figure out what the reference to Friends was. My guess is that the main character in this book, Margot, the one who, like, organizes the trip to the astrology house, to me, she came off to me more like a Monica type A personality who's really obsessive compulsive and into, like, organization. And I think she just wants everybody to have fun on a vacation. And when it doesn't go well, she gets really upset. That's my theory of how this book connects to Friends. Other than that, the reason why I DNF'd was because this book is supposed to be a thriller and a mystery. Nothing about it was mysterious. Nothing about it was thrilling. It was just a bunch of family drama and a bunch of petty arguments. The only character that I liked was Farah, because we are the same star sign. She is a Virgo. I am a Virgo. And I was able to relate to her the easiest because we are the same star sign. I mean, credit where credit is due. I'm not really into astrology, so what made this book interesting for me were, like, the character cards that listed the star signs of all the characters and how they would relate easiest to the other characters. I just thought that was cool and not really figured out. I couldn't even stand these characters for a long enough time to finish the whole book and figure out what happened at the end. I just didn't like it. I mean, the writing was good, but the characters were all pretentious and annoying. And as I was just saying, the only one I liked is Farah. We are almost done. Thank you for sticking with me for this whole time. I appreciate your patience. The next book is called The Hacienda. I stopped reading this at 200 pages because the romance was taking a long time to build up. Kind of like the reason why I DNF'd Jane Eyre. I read The Hacienda a couple of months ago, back in July. The next book is The Haunting on the Hill, which is basically a modern day version of The Haunting on Hill House. And I thought the kids in this book were whiny and spoiled. That's why I didn't finish it. The next book is The Unwedding. The Unwedding was also on my tier list for Reese's Book Club backlist. No, Reese's Book Club 2024. This was Reese's Book Club pick for June. I had to stop reading it because there were too many points of views and it was very confusing. And the main character was too whiny and she was annoying. And finally, the last book is Wrong Place, Wrong Time. This book is a thriller book that also incorporates magical realism into it. And the magical realism plot device was not really used very effectively, which is why I had to DNF it. I also had to DNF it because the plot was too confusing. sorry about that. As I was apologizing for earlier, my allergies are really acting up pretty badly tonight. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you got a lot of good recommendations for spooky season. If you have read any of these books, please leave a comment below with your thoughts. I would love to hear from you. Thank you.